There are 15 invasive plants that came over here, took over the country, and can still land right on your dinner plate. And today I am going to walk you through every one of them. They line our highways, they creep through our backyards, and some of them are still for sale in the garden centers, but every single one of them is edible. To most of us, they look like part of the scenery, but hidden in plain sight, these are silent invaders. They outcompete the native plants, they reshape whole hillsides and waterways, and a few of them even help spread disease. Here is the twist though, the one nobody tells you. Every one of them can be eaten. Some were prized foods in ancient kitchens, some became survival food in times of war, and a few still turn up in fine cooking today. They are especially troublesome here in the United States, but wherever you are watching from, the idea holds the same. The plant your neighbors call a weed and pour poison on can turn out to be a resource hiding right in front of them. I have been eating a fair number of these for most of my life, and I want to show you which ones are worth knowing. My name is Amos, I am 66 years old, and I have spent 60 years walking these mountains, learning which plants feed a family and which ones muscled out the ground the old people once tended, so if that is the sort of thing you want more of, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let me take you to the first one. Number 1 is burdock, Arctium minus, the tenacious weed whose clinging seed burrs inspired the invention of Velcro. A Swiss engineer noticed how the tiny hooks on the burrs grabbed onto his dog's fur and his own trousers after a walk in the woods, and that one observation gave us the hook and loop fastener the whole world uses now. But long before it was an engineer's muse, burdock was a traveler brought over from Europe in the 1600s, its burrs riding in on the clothing and the livestock of the early colonists. Now it thrives in disturbed soil, forming dense stands with big rhubarb-like leaves that shade out the native grasses and wildflowers, and those burrs are a nuisance to anybody walking by, ruining the wool right off a sheep. Yet in Japan, burdock root known as gobo is a celebrated vegetable cultivated for its deep, earthy flavor, and the long, slender taproot gets stir-fried, pickled, or simmered in broth for a texture that is both crisp and chewy. The trick to digging it is to go after the first-year plants in the fall or the following spring before it sends up its flower stalk, because after that the root turns woody and bitter and puts all its strength into seed. Scrub it, peel it, and drop the cut pieces straight into cold water with a splash of vinegar so it does not brown, then cook it low and slow. Digging that root is a fine way to manage this stubborn plant while you gather yourself a gourmet ingredient at the same time. Number 2 is Dame's Rocket Hesperus matronalis, and it takes the opposite approach from burdock. Where burdock snags and scratches, Dame's Rocket wins you over with color and fragrance, lining the riverbanks and the woodland edges with beautiful spires of purple and white flowers that fill the evening air with a sweet, clove-like scent. It is so pretty it is still sold in wildflower seed mixes and planted in gardens all across America. But this European beauty is an imposter. It looks so much like our native wild blue phlox that folks welcome it in without realizing it is an aggressive invader. The way to tell them apart is simple. Dame's Rocket has 4 petals on each flower, while the native phlox has 5, and that small difference points to a big problem because Dame's Rocket forms dense stands that crowd out the phlox the local insects and butterflies have relied on for thousands of years. Every leaf and flower you forage is one less seed left to spread, so here removing the plant can be as simple as adding it to your plate. The young leaves add a slightly bitter, peppery kick to a salad, much like arugula, and they are rich in vitamin C, while the flowers make a beautiful, spicy garnish scattered over a plate. Gather the leaves early, before the plant flowers, when the bitterness is mildest, and if it is already blooming, pinch off those 4-petaled flowers as you pass, because every one you take is a fistful of seed that will never reach the phlox. Here foraging is not just a meal, it is a small act of conservation. Number 3 is multiflora rose, Rosa multiflora, and this one was not a stowaway, it was invited in. In the 1930s, the government was desperate to solve soil erosion stripping the farmland bare, so the Soil Conservation Service turned to a thorny shrub imported from Japan and promoted it as a living fence that would hold the soil, pen the livestock, and feed the wildlife. At first it seemed like a miracle, but nature had other plans. The birds gorged on the bright red rose hips and scattered the seeds far beyond the farm boundaries, and a single plant can throw 1 million seeds a year, each one able to wait 20 years in the soil before it sprouts. The result was impenetrable thickets climbing 15 feet high, choking out the native plants and leaving whole pastures useless, and yet hidden inside those thorns is real nourishment because those same rose hips are packed with vitamins A, E, and especially C. During the Second World War, when citrus was scarce, the British government actually paid children to gather rose hips for a syrup that kept scurvy off the population. Sweet, tart, and stubborn, they remind you that even a troublesome weed can carry unexpected value. Gather the hips after the first frost. When they soften and sweeten, split them and scrape out the seeds and the little irritating hairs around them, and then cook the flesh down into a syrup or a jelly. A spoonful of that is a spoonful of the same vitamin C that kept British children off the scurvy through a world war. Number 4 is Japanese barberry, Berberis thunbergi, one of the most popular landscaping shrubs in America, prized for the neat, dense mounds it forms and the way the deer leave it alone. It was first brought in back in 1875 as an ornamental and later pushed as a replacement for the common barberry, which hosted a fungus that ruined wheat crops. But this popular little shrub carries a dark secret. The dense shade under its branches makes a perfect humid shelter for ticks, and scientific studies show that forests infested with Japanese barberry hold far higher numbers of the black-legged ticks that carry Lyme disease. The shrub even changes the chemistry of the soil, making it harder for the native plants to grow. Brought in to safeguard a crop, it ended up safeguarding something else entirely, the very ticks that spread Lyme. The birds mostly leave its berries alone, but people can use them, tart and scarlet, cooked down into jams and jellies once you sweeten them, and the inner bark and root have a long history in the old herbals for their bitter yellow compound. If you decide to pull this shrub to clear the ticks off your ground, and a great many folks now do, wear good gloves for the thorns and strip the ripe berries first, so at least the plant pays you a little rent on its way out of your woods. Number 5 is watercress, Nasturtium officinale, which you have seen in the high-end grocery packaged as a delicate salad green with a peppery bite. It is celebrated as a superfood, carrying more vitamin K than an apple and more vitamin C than an orange, and it has been cultivated for centuries, prized by the ancient Greeks and Romans for their health. But this celebrated green has a wild side. Brought over by European immigrants, watercress escaped cultivation and is now counted a noxious weed in dozens of states, thriving in the cool, slow water of springs and streams, forming dense floating mats that clog the waterways, block the sunlight, and crowd out the native water plants the fish depend on. The plant has a clever trick. When you crush the leaves, two chemicals combine into a reaction folks call the mustard oil bomb, and that is what gives watercress its signature spicy flavor. On the supermarket shelf, it is a superfood, but out in the wild it is a green menace, thriving not in a salad but in the very streams it is strangling. Gather it only from clean water you trust. Number 6 is Japanese honeysuckle, Lonicera japonica, and for many of us the sweet smell of it is tangled up with childhood, plucking a blossom and sipping the drop of nectar out of the end. But that same vine, so beloved in the backyard, is a relentless invader. Brought over from Japan in the early 1800s as an ornamental, it now coils through the forests with suffocating speed, strangling young trees and smothering the wildflowers under its sprawling mats. Once it takes hold, it does not just decorate the woods, it dominates them, girdling trunks and branches, while its dense cover starves the forest floor of light. Yet the very blossoms that fuel our nostalgia are edible. The flowers can be steeped into a fragrant tea or simmered into a syrup with notes of jasmine, vanilla, and honey, a good reminder that even the sweetest invader can carry a darker truth underneath the beauty. Pick the flowers on a warm morning when they are fully open and most fragrant, and use only the flowers because the berries and the rest of the plant are not for eating. Pulling and eating the blossoms all summer will not clear a hillside, but it turns an afternoon of hard fighting with the vine into something worth the sweat. Number 7 is field garlic, Allium vineale, and long before it was a common lawn weed, it was a world traveler. Native to Europe and Asia, it hitched a ride to the New World in the 1700s, hiding in the solid ballast of the cargo ships, the soil and rock they used to weigh a vessel down for the ocean crossing, which got dumped on shore when they reached America, full of foreign seed. Field garlic made itself right at home. It looks like a patch of chives taking over the lawn, and it can be a serious farm pest because when the dairy cows graze on it, their milk and butter take on a strong garlic taste that will not sell, and it can taint a wheat field and ruin the flour. But what makes it a headache for the farmer makes it a gift for the forager, because every part of the plant is edible, from the hollow leaves to the underground bulbs, carrying a potent flavor somewhere between garlic and onion. Snip the green tops like you would chives to scatter over eggs or potatoes, and dig the little bulbs to use anywhere you would reach for garlic. It grows nearly year-round in mild country and comes back stronger every time you cut it, so you will never dig it all out. You might as well eat your way through it. Number 8 is salsify, Tragopogon porifolius, which grows in dry earth and yet tastes of the ocean, a paradox that earned it the nickname oyster plant and made it a favorite in European kitchens long before it reached North America in the 1700s. The colonists cultivated it for that mild, oyster-like taste, simmering the roots in soups or frying them in butter for a dish that felt both humble and refined. Over time it slipped out of fashion, drifting from the garden into the wild, along the roadsides and the open meadows. To an untrained eye it looks like tall grass, but in bloom it shows striking purple flowers that close by noon, followed by seed heads so large and feathery they earned it the other name of goat's beard. For a modern forager, rediscovering salsify is like turning up a forgotten treasure. It's creamy taproot mashed, roasted, or fried for a delicate savory flavor unlike anything else, a relic of Victorian dining that now grows wild at the edge of the fields. Dig the root in the first fall or the following spring, before the plant flowers and the root goes tough, and peel it under water with a little vinegar, the same as the burdock, because it browns fast once the air hits it. One honest warning, though. Some poisonous plants grow along the same roadside, so learn salsify cold by its grassy leaves and that purple bloom that shuts at midday before you ever put a root in your basket. Number 9 is the Asiatic dayflower, Camelina communis, a splash of blue that appears and vanishes almost as fast as it comes. It opens its delicate blooms in the morning, and by nightfall they are gone, living only for a single day, 2 vivid sky-blue petals floating above a ghostly white one. For all that fragile look, the plant spreads with real tenacity, forming dense mats that crowd out the native species. Yet this humble invader carries a legacy far greater than its size, because for centuries in Japan the artists crushed its petals to make a brilliant blue pigment, one used in the woodblock prints of Hokusai and his contemporaries. The same flower that chokes a field today once colored some of the most famous art in the world, and the story does not end there, because the leaves, stems, and blossoms are all edible, with a mild, pea-like sweetness eaten raw or cooked. A common weed, a painter's tool, and a food source all in one. Number 10 is the daylily, Hemerocallis fulva, which paints the roadsides and the ditches with fiery orange trumpets that refuse to fade. Hardy and low maintenance, it was welcomed over from Asia as an ornamental and spread fast through American yards, shared from neighbor to neighbor so widely that today it thrives in dense colonies covering the ditches, fields, and riverbanks in waves of color. Beneath that beauty is an invader's weapon, thick tuberous roots that knit together into sprawling networks and leave no room for the native plants, which is why folks call them ditch lilies. Yet this invader is also a delicacy. In Chinese cooking, the unopened buds are dried into golden needles, a prized ingredient in soups and stir-fries, and the fresh flowers carry a crisp, sweet bite that adds texture to a salad, while the firm underground tubers can be cooked like a little nutty potato. On our roadsides they wipe out the natives, but on the table they are a treasure. Be sure of your plant, though, and eat only the true orange ditch daylily, Hemerocallis, not the true lilies that share the name but not the family, because those are a different plant altogether, and some folks find even the daylily disagrees with them, so go easy the first time. Number 11 is kudzu, Purell montana, the vine that folks say ate the South. It came over from Japan for the 1876 exposition and got promoted hard in the early 1900s, first as a pretty porch vine, then by the same erosion-fighting agencies that gave us the multiflora rose, which paid farmers to plant it across the eroding southern hills. It grows as much as a foot a day in high summer, climbing over trees, barns, and abandoned cars until whole hillsides disappear under a green blanket. But kudzu is food and medicine both. The starchy root has been used in Japan and China for centuries, ground into a fine powder called kudzu that thickens soups and sauces, and the young leaves cook up like any green while the sweet purple flowers, smelling of grape, make a fine jelly. The plant that swallowed the South will feed you from root to flower. Gather the young leaf tips through the summer, dig the big starchy roots in the cold months when the vine has died back, and pick the grape-scented flowers in late summer for jelly or a sweet cordial. Digging a kudzu root is honest work because they run deep and heavy, but there is a real satisfaction in eating your way at a hillside that has beaten so many people before you. Number 12 is Japanese knotweed, Falopia japonica, brought over as an ornamental in the 1800s and now one of the most feared invaders on Earth, tough enough to push its shoot up through asphalt and concrete and nearly impossible to kill once it roots. It forms bamboo-like thickets along the streams and roadsides that crowd out everything else and destabilize the banks. But in early spring, before it turns woody, those young red-tipped shoots are tender and tart, tasting a great deal like rhubarb, good stewed with a little honey, baked into a pie, or simmered into a sauce. Knotweed is also one of the richest plant sources of resveratrol, the same compound folks chase in red wine. Harvest the young shoots in spring and bag your cuttings carefully rather than composting them, because a scrap of this root will start a whole new colony. Number 13 is autumn olive, Elaeagnus umbellata, a silver-leaved shrub brought in through the middle of the last century for erosion control and wildlife cover, and like so many on this list, it did its job too well, spreading into old fields and roadsides and fixing nitrogen in the soil in a way that actually changes the ground for the native plants. But come fall, it hangs heavy with small speckled red berries, and those berries are a genuine prize, tart and sweet at once, and carrying lycopene, the red antioxidant of the tomato, at levels many times higher than a tomato holds. Eat them fresh once they soften, or cook them down into a jam or a fruit leather. A shrub planted to hold a bank turns out to hand you one of the best wild fruits of the season. Number 14 is the wineberry Rubus funiculaceus, an Asian cousin of our raspberry brought over in the 1890s as breeding stock and now running wild through the eastern woods and field edges, its canes covered in fuzzy red hairs that make it easy to know. It forms dense, thorny thickets that shade out the native brambles, but in early summer it ripens into bright, jewel-red berries that are, to my taste, sweeter and brighter than a cultivated raspberry, with a tartness that wakes up your mouth. Eat them straight off the cane, cook them into jam, or fold them into a cobbler. This is one invasive even a cautious eater will chase down the fence row for. Number 15 is mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, which came over with the European settlers, who valued it as a cooking herb and a bitter tonic, and which now lines the roadsides and vacant lots in tall gray-green stands that spread by a creeping root and crowd the native ground. But mugwort has fed and flavored people for a very long time. In Germany it was the classic herb for a roast goose. In Japan and Korea the young leaves are pounded into rice cakes and dumplings for their color and their gentle, sage-like bitterness, and the leaves make an old and trusted bitter tea. Use the young leaves and tips in moderation as a seasoning herb, the way the old cooks did, and you turn a roadside weed into the same flavor the Europeans crossed an ocean carrying. From a root that tastes of oysters to a berry brighter than any you can buy, and a flower that gave Japanese artists their blue, these 15 invaders proved the line between a weed and a resource was never as clear as we were told. Some of them strangle the forest, some of them clog the rivers, and a few are still sitting on a shelf at the garden center with a price tag on them, but every one of them can end up on your plate. Now I want to hear from you, so tell me down below which of these you would actually try and whether you have ever foraged one yourself, because the one that gets the most comments is the one I go dig up and cook next for you, right here on this ridge.